Carol got a call from her husband. "Why isn't Tom in preschool? What am I paying money for?" he shouted and hung up. He was always doing that, venting his anger and aggression and interrupting the conversation. Carol didn't even have time to answer that Tom had a fever and she left him at home. He is not interested in answers or excuses. It is important for him to humiliate the other person in order to assert himself. That's Steve's main pleasure. It's what he's always striving for. Carol didn't even try to call back. Why would she want to hear hurtful words about what a bad mother and a disgusting wife she was? She didn't want to ruin her evening because of Steve. No, she wouldn't do that. Not anymore. A divorce lay ahead, which promised to be difficult. Unfair insults and accusations flew in Carol's direction. The ex-husband, who was used to taking it out on his abusive wife, was surprised by Carol's action. He thought she was stupid and incapable of an independent life. He assumed that after a while she would return, begging to take her back. But Carol did not return. Instead, she started a new life. This only happens in sweet melodramas, when the tyrant husband suddenly realizes the repugnance of his behavior, repents, gives gifts, and turns into a positive hero. But in life, unfortunately, this rarely happens. In life, an aggressive man cannot simply let go when his beloved victim slips away from his hard embrace. He feels frustration and anger. He wants to put the victim back where he was and punish her so she won't dare do that to him again. Steve humiliated and abused Carol. Just as it happens in all dysfunctional families, where the head of the family imagines himself to be the ruler. But all these power games are confined to the walls of the apartment. Beyond its boundaries, his power and influence disappear. How should he behave when everyone around him is so stupid and evil? The boss at work is mean. The coworkers are stupid. The neighbor is a huge man who won't let him sleep at weekends, mowing his lawn, and an annoying old lady with her dog. But you can't just punch your boss, your coworkers, or your neighbor in the face, or you'll face a retaliatory attack. What about the old lady? She can file a police report. You go home, at least to calm down a little bit. You take a shower, you want to eat your rightful steak and vegetables, grab a can of beer, watch TV, and take a little nap. But it's not like that at home. Your wife looks you in the eye and asks for money for groceries, even though you have already given her a considerable amount from your salary. The child screams and runs around the room as if he wants to make you angry on purpose. Instead of steak for dinner, you get pasta. You make a fair point about it, and your wife turns away and says they don't have enough money to buy good meat and have to pay rent. And then there's the annoying mess in the house and the neighbor who keeps doing his repairs. And it's as if she doesn't hear you, standing over your head and talking about money as if money is pouring in for him. No wonder you want to punch that dumb, lazy Carol. And she was used to crying silently in the bathroom while the washing machine was running. Carol is exhausted, trying to make sense of the pittance her husband gives her. She is counting the days when she will go back to work and become at least somewhat independent. But her son is constantly sick, and they are constantly borrowing money. Before her son was born, Carol worked as a journalist in a publishing house. She wrote all kinds of articles. She had a very strict boss who would not tolerate absences from work, so he rarely hired young women with young children. Carol remembered the look on her boss's face before she left for maternity. "My advice to you, dearie, don't come back. I'm not going to keep looking for replacements for you." Steve, who grew up in a family where his father constantly bullied everyone in the family, drew his own conclusions and adopted his father's unpleasant traits, becoming part of this social cage. When he was young, he was a jolly, carefree guy, but his place was taken by a rude upstart. Scandals every day. A spot on a t-shirt is not washed, soup is not salty, and a scream is heard throughout the house. The spouse asked the wrong question. Hysteria is guaranteed, and even if it's not her fault, it's still her fault. One day, Steve was in high spirits. He came home from work, pleased with the bonus he had received, and suggested we go for a walk to the mall. The man was smiling so much, joking merrily with Carol, who was picking up their young son, Tom. Everyone packed up and set off without incident. The sun is shining, there is no traffic, Tom is not cranky, everything is fine. But as they approached the center, they were stuck in traffic, and her husband's face began to slowly grow irritated. And Carol, inwardly shrinking, was already sensing a bad change. Finally, when they arrived at the mall, they spun around in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Steve began muttering swear words. "Can't we just stop right where we are? There's a car pulling away now." That's all Carol had time to say. "Shut your mouth! Is someone asking you?" shouted Steve. Carol began to suffocate in the confined space of the car. She wanted to run away, but Carol knows that while she's unbuckling the baby seat clasps, Steve will rudely drag her into the cabin and scream even louder, scaring the baby. So she keeps silent. Suddenly, a family comes out of the mall, a mom and dad and 3 noisy children between the ages of 4 and 10. They walked up to the green car and drove away, happy. It seemed to Carol that they were living in some other reality. Steve finally finds a parking spot. They get out of the car. Carol opens the back door, unbuckles her son. She puts Tom on the pavement, reaches into the passenger compartment for his bag, and then everything happens. Tom sprinted toward the mall, right in front of the huge car that was pulling out of the underground parking lot. Carol, dumbfounded, rushed after the kid. "Stupid fool, watch your child!" yelled the driver of the car, braking sharply and leaning out the window. Carol lifted Tom in her arms, her lips trembling. Steve ran up and squeezed her forearm hard. "Excuse me, I was distracted for a second. Here's the result," Steve said politely to the driver of the car. The husband's face expressed sincere regret. The driver of the car hit the gas and sped away, spraying Carol, Tom, and Steve from the puddle. "That's it! We've had our walk! Get in the car, now!" shouted Stephen. Tom cried, Steve screamed, and Carol was silent. She listened to Steve, all that she needed to hear from the stupid chicken with no brains, who almost killed her own son. Driving up to the house, Steve said, "Get out!" They left, taking their things, and Steve quickly drove away. "He'll come back drunk, and the nightmare will start again," Carol thought. She slowly climbed up the steps, holding the baby's hand tightly, opened the door, and sat down. Tom was standing in front of her in tears. "Do you want to go to Grandma's?" Carol asked. "Yes!" He didn't mind. On the way to her mother's house, Carol couldn't stop thinking that she couldn't take any more of Steve's attitude. She couldn't stand the scandals and the fear anymore. Mom, as usual, instead of supporting her daughter, sided with Steve. "So I see you had another fight with Stephen." She stood in the doorway, folding her arms across her chest. Steve was her favorite. Suave, handsome, witty, he won her mother over at first sight when he once said, "Susan, forgive me, but may I address you simply as Susie? I cannot call a young, beautiful woman by her full name." And Susan melted. "Stevie, my boy, of course. I'll be very glad." From then on, my mother took her son-in-law's side completely. Carol never complained about her husband again. It was no use. This time, when Carol shared her worries with her mother, she was rebuked. "You almost killed Tom, and you're complaining about it, too. I'm speechless. I don't know what I'd do to you if I were him," Susan said indignantly. "Mom, are you crazy? Why don't you ask, and where was your adoring son-in-law at that time?" Carol cried. "First of all, you're a mother." Susan didn't concede. "Be kind enough to take responsibility for your actions. The guy's out there going crazy looking for you, and you're out of the house. I'll call him right away." "He's intoxicated," Carol sighed. "Okay, I'm going home," Carol said. She already knew that if she stayed the night, sweet Stephen would already be here in the morning with the scandal. "Call me when you get there, daughter." "Tom, wait. Grandma's going to give you some candy," mumbled Susan. "Don't. Tom can't have sweets," Carol said tiredly. To no avail, the mother wasn't listening. Late that night, Carol rang the other doorbell. Tom was cranky. He was very tired and could barely stand up, and Carol whispered, "Well, open up, please. Who else should I go to?" The girlfriends themselves liquidated after her marriage. Steve then said firmly, "You have me, why do you need someone else?" And in the beginning, it was very pleasant. Just him and her. Really, why do family people need any girlfriends? At first, her friends tried to call and invite her to the cafe, but Carol declined the calls and invitations. There was nothing to impose. She had a family. A year later, her friends disappeared, and now she was dying to talk, to ask for help. Just a few days to spend the night. Carol would start looking for some work and get an apartment. But that wasn't going to work. She couldn't go to the friends she herself had rejected. So she came here, not knowing what to expect. The door opened. When Carol saw her mother-in-law, she was speechless. She expected to see the old woman she had barely seen on her wedding day. Barbara was so quiet and silent that she didn't even want to look in her direction. But how good her father-in-law had been in front of her, the unassuming woman, tastelessly dressed and withdrawn. They were very much alike, father and son. Carol had no idea at the time that soon she herself would look a lot like Barbara. The last time the women had met was at the funeral of her father-in-law, who had died suddenly of a heart attack. Their gazes met for a second, and Carol immediately averted her gaze. She communicated with her son rarely, only on the phone for no more than a minute. She irritated Steve a lot, and he always cut the conversation short and hung up. "She makes me shake." He was indignant the whole evening afterwards. After her father-in-law died, Barbara stopped calling, and her son never once remembered his mother. But her daughter-in-law did when she had nowhere else to go. Carol stood before her with her mouth open in surprise. A young and beautiful woman in a pretty house dress was looking at her. Light makeup revealed the beauty of her beautiful gray eyes. Fantastic. "Caroline, Tom, what are you standing around for? Come on in," Barbara said. "Let me help you undress. Are you hungry?" Carol nodded affirmatively, and her mother-in-law, without asking too many questions, led Tom to wash his face. Then she fed them vegetables. "I'm on a fancy diet now, so I don't keep anything spicy or sweet in the house," smiled my mother-in-law. Barbara's white kitchen was warm and bright. There was a vase of flowers on the round table, and violets on the wide windowsill were a joy to the eye in bright colors. Painted plates hung on the wall. "Do you like it?" asked Barbara. "I'm the one who's been getting into ceramics lately. They say I have a talent." "Barbara, I'm speechless. You look so much prettier. What is the reason for this change?" said Carol timidly. You have no idea, Barbara interrupted Carol. When I saw you on the doorstep, I was glad that you had the strength to get away from him. You did well, Carol. You don't have to break your life the way I broke it. You don't have to be patient and wait for gratitude. You know, I'm very grateful to my husband for one thing he did. That he died in time. Thank him so much for that, Barbara said confidently. She felt free for the first time in 30 years. There was a gracious silence in the house, and there was peace in her soul. Even the flowers suddenly began to grow quickly. Barbara's thin hair grew thicker. Wrinkles were smoothed out. It made her want to dress nicely, even at home. So what if no one can see? Barbara thought. The world is full of interesting things. Theaters, movies, parks, cafes. A new favorite hobby appeared. Ceramics, and wonderful men began to pay attention to her. Life shone with bright colors. Barbara wiped Tom's face with a napkin and took him into the bedroom. Half an hour later she returned and sat down across from Carol again. Let's continue our conversation, she said. The daughter-in-law told her everything. Carol cried, and the tears brought her incredible relief. I decided to do what I should have done a long time ago. I'd like to spend the night for a few days with someone to babysit Tom while I find a job. We won't stay here long, don't worry. Live as long as you need to. Leave when you're ready. I can't keep you here forever. You're a young and beautiful woman, and you need to make a life for yourself, too. And I'll always be glad to keep an eye on Tom if I have to look after him. Be safe, said Barbara. Carol blushed. Stephen, aren't you going to turn me in? She asked. No, I changed the phone and the door locks, too. If anything happens, we'll call the police, said my mother-in-law. Her voice took on a harsh tone. Barbara wondered. Wait a minute. I'll be right. She left the room, dialing someone on the phone. Deborah, how are you doing? Are you still looking for a copywriter to run your social media? My daughter-in-law Carol used to work in publishing, and now she's at home with a young child. But she would love to work from home. Wow, that's great. Then I'll give her your phone number so you can set up an interview. That's great. Thank you so much. Bye. Honey, I think I just found you the perfect job. Barbara stunned her daughter-in-law with the wonderful news. Yes, the divorce wasn't easy, but Carol got through it. She and Barbara had expected the worst from Steve. The kidnapping of Tom, the dirty blackmail, the guard at the door of her new job, where Carol came once or twice a week. But they were well prepared. Carol wrote a statement to the police, and Barbara witnessed her testimony. They reported that Carol had a real reason to be afraid of Steve. They later provided the police with a recording of a threatening phone call from Steve. They also once had to call the police to her mother's house after Steve arrived drunk and tried to kick down the door, screaming. After all that, he was served with a restraining order against Carol, which is what she wanted. And Steve quickly gave up. All he could do was call his mother and say mean things. But that didn't bother any of them anymore. When he met with the lawyers, he quickly signed all the papers and didn't even argue. He even waived the right to see Tom. Apparently, he did not want to play the role of a father and participate in the life of a young child. Steve said it would make it even easier for him to find a new, normal wife. As crazy as that sounds. Still to come is finding an apartment to rent. Carol has already looked at a few options she can afford with her new job, and the job is a dream come true. Doing what you love is a miracle, and soon when Carol is hired on the main staff, her salary will also increase significantly, which was excellent. In the meantime, Tom enjoyed the company of his loving grandmother, truly loving. Although Tom sometimes complained that Grandma Barbara had no candy at home. But he loved the pineapple, banana, and kiwi salad that his grandmother made for dessert. Steve, of course, had tried to pressure his mother, but, having been rebuffed, he no longer knew what to say. Barbara now looked like a bossy goddess, but not the timid mouse he had grown accustomed to seeing as a child. "Don't you dare come into this house!" shouted Barbara. "There's no place for you here, and don't you dare wait for Carol or Tom. She's got a fiancé now who's a master wrestler. You won't like meeting him after what we told him about you." Steve was a coward when it wasn't a woman who had to compete. He didn't even ask anything about Tom. Then Carol and Barbara laughed for a long time at the imaginary fiancé, a master of the sport of freestyle wrestling. But in the middle of the laughter, Barbara suddenly said seriously, "Carol, you need a man after all. Let him be a master at something good." "I don't want to. I'm not ready." "Are we bad together?" replied Carol. The three of them were having a very good time. 2 years had passed, and Carol was making rapid progress in her career. She had enough savings to buy an apartment on credit, take a vacation by the ocean, and live a normal life. Steve was making good on his alimony payments. A year later, Steve remarried. They say his new spouse doesn't let himself get hurt. Steve began complaining about his new wife and running to his former mother-in-law, who continued to sympathize and sympathize with him. Carol is also thinking about the wedding, or rather, the gifts for the newlyweds. Barbara is marrying a gentle and attractive man, her former classmate who has loved her all her life. She didn't want to legalize the relationship at all, but the groom begged the bride, and she gave in. "Look, Paul, if I don't like being married, nothing can keep me," Barbara used to say to a man in love. And Carol liked living alone. Why the rush? She was just beginning to love her life.